Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Lansku, and I'm going to be talking to you briefly about education in China and the Chinese educational system, some of the similarities and some of the differences from the American education system. So, starting off with the culture and the history, China's education system is deeply influenced by its rich cultural and historical heritage. It emphasizes Confucian values, and they have a high amount of respect for authority, diligence in their work, and timeliness, kind of professionalism type of behaviors, and the overall importance of education. For centuries, education has been highly esteemed in Chinese society, and it has been seen as the key to social mobility and success within the Chinese society. Their structure of the education system is categorized into basic, higher, and adult education. So, basic education lasts about 9 years, encompassing primary and junior secondary schooling. It includes preschool, primary, and then your secondary stages, which would be like kind of your middle and high school in American. The secondary education offers academic or vocational paths. The National Higher Education Entrance Exam, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is mandatory for university admission. Now, this is very different from how American students get into their universities, where you take the ACT or the SAT and you provide your transcript of your high school grades and the different activities that you may have been involved with in high school. That's not so much the case in China. They really choose their college availability per student and what you're able to go for based on your score on this one exam at the end of your schooling right before you go off to university. So higher education includes universities offering similar degrees and certification as US colleges. So whatever university you do get into, if you're a Chinese student, you do have similar options as what you would have at US colleges in terms of what to pursue. You can be a doctor, you can be an engineer, you can be a speech therapist, you can be a teacher. There's lots and lots of different options. An adult education is a little bit different because it spans from primary to higher levels and addresses literacy for people who may have not finished or never had the chance to go to school. It focuses on skill development through various programs like the Workers' Party and the Peasants' Primary Schools, which is for maybe lower socioeconomic status people who did not have a chance to take part in the formal education system. And so these specialized secondary schools and online universities can teach adults different life skills and vocational skills. So their structure isn't too dissimilar from the American education system. How they split up grades is slightly different. And one of the major differences is the conclusion of high school with that major exam. So the evolution of the Chinese education system, the modern Chinese education system has undergone some pretty significant reforms since the establishment of the People's Republic of China, the formal establishment of the country in 1949 as the People's Republic of China, um, after the last emperor. The reforms aim to provide education for all, leading to a vast expansion of educational opportunities at all levels. And so basically, education had been prioritized in the modern system, whereas in the more traditional system, it had been reserved for those with different societal access, who maybe came from a higher class, and it wasn't necessarily available to all people. They tried to make it a little bit more egalitarian and distribute educational opportunities to the populace at large. Now, there are still some discrepancies and disproportionate representation based on different socioeconomic statuses of people in China and Chinese students. But they, with the modern system, are working towards educating more people uh, more equally. And so these reforms were mostly driven by the government's desire to modernize the country and enhance its global competitiveness. That brings us to the role of the government. There are central control agencies that are run by the government, and they play a central role in China's education system. The Ministry of Education oversees educational policies and regulations, and this is an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, and local authorities under the influence and direction of the Ministry of Education implements them and checks up on them to make sure that schools are following all the rules that the Communist Party dictates that they should be following. Communist Party also influences educational content and ensures ideological conformity. So something that is very emphasized in American schools is individualism and diversity nowadays, not only in the student body, but also diversity of thought. And that's not so much the case. It generally is not the case under communist rule to have ideological differences. Communism pretty much only works when there is ideological conformity. So to maintain power, the government very heavily influences students and raises them in the ideological bounds of the Communist Party, stating that the goals of the party are more important than the individual, the goals of the state are more important than the individual. So that is something that is quite different than American schools, where you have a lot more freedom to be yourself and express yourself and be unique and have different views and opinions. It's not so much the case in China. And that brings us to the role of teachers. Teachers are highly respected in Chinese society. They are seen as people who, excuse me, who are ushering in the next generation of thinkers and creators in Chinese society. And so they're expected to uphold moral values while imparting knowledge. And mostly the moral values come from within the Communist Party. And so they undergo rigorous training and they have to meet various professional requirements that are set by the government, similar as to how teachers in the United States need to go through schooling to meet professional requirements that are set by our state and federal governments to be teachers. Um, Teachers in China also face challenges that American teachers face, such as heavy workloads and low salaries. Teaching is still not necessarily a incredibly highly paid profession in China, and neither is it in America. And oftentimes, American teachers have been feeling a lot of burnout, especially after the pandemic. And so there is those challenges that do exist in China as well as America. It's teachers being overworked and not being paid enough for the work that they do, even though they are highly respected in their society. So, continuing on with different similarities and differences that I've noticed as doing my research, is that compared to Western education systems, the Chinese system places a much greater emphasis on rote memorization and standardized testing. Um, because they are dealing with such a large population and because they aim for consistency and uniformity, this is one of the easier ways that they can keep track of all of the grades and performance of their students. American students may take several entrance exams to apply for colleges, and the Chinese education system has only one exam, the Gaokao, to determine what type of university a student may attend. So this is that test that I was talking about earlier in the presentation, that this is the culmination of the 12 years of schooling. You take this one test, and depending on your score, it tells you what universities you are eligible to get into or not get into. So this is an incredibly important test for Chinese students right at the end of their high school. And the curriculum is more centralized with a focus on core subjects like math and science. They don't veer off into, um, I don't know, more interest-based subjects, as opposed to core hardened sciences and math, history, things like that. Both systems do share the goal of preparing students for future success in either the university system or a trade skill. And so that leaves us with some stats and some other information. China does boast some impressive statistics in education, with nearly universal primary education that's available and fairly high enrollment rates in secondary and tertiary education. In 1990, only 4% of individuals aged 18 to 22 were enrolled in higher education, so 4%. And then by 2014, this figure surged nearly tenfold to 37.5%, which is a pretty significant spike considering how many people China has and how large the population is. The spike can mostly be attributed to the growth of the middle class through that time period, general economic growth through global trade benefits, and government initiatives to get more people involved in higher education and post-secondary education. And so another stat is in preparation for the Gaokao exam, many students will study for 3 to 4 hours on the weekends and take weekend study classes so that they will go into school on the weekends in the months leading up to this exam because it's so important. I wasn't able to find out if they get more than one shot at it because you can take an SAT in America, bomb it, study for it, and do better a second time. I don't know if that's the case on this exam. I'd have to look it up a little more and see if I could find that answer. But either way, it's incredibly important because this is what gets taken into account, not your extracurriculars, not your other various talents and abilities, grades, etc. It really comes down to this exam is the focal point of getting into college and higher education, which is what a lot of Chinese students are aiming for, um, or some kind of vocational program, but that's all kind of through the same pipeline. So it's a very important exam. And that is just kind of a brief overview and general knowledge about the Chinese education system, how it's similar, how it's different than the American education system, the influence of the government, and the role of teachers, and some changes that have happened over the course of history in their education system. So these are my references from a few different journals and a couple different websites briefing about the oldest system in the world and the changes that the system has undergone, especially this article was pretty interesting. The first one talking about the systems and responses during the pandemic, which is where I sourced some of the information about the teachers. So yeah, very interesting. If you want to learn more, then check it out. There's a whole lot more to learn about the Chinese education system than what I put just on this PowerPoint. But I hope it was informative and somewhat interesting. Thank you.